Good afternoon, everyone. We have the last session today, and I think that we can start this session with a very strong and powerful thought by Schopenhauer, who said that we can say, we can act as we want, but we cannot change the way we want. And the last session before the coffee break was a great proof that the past cast a long shadow on how we want to act. And we talked about literature, we talked about critical geography. Now we have time to move towards international relations. And as the title of this panel suggests, we're gonna discuss the colonial as a factor influencing foreign policy. And we're gonna focus on relations between free states, Poland, Germany, and Ukraine. We have three great panelists this afternoon, this evening. Let me introduce in alphabetical order Christian Noack, University of Amsterdam, and Dr. Noack is Associate Professor for Eastern European Studies at the University of Amsterdam, and his research focuses on the past and present of Muslim and other minorities in Russia and Central Asia. Dr. Noack is also preoccupied with the cultural and social history of the late Soviet period and the representation of the history and collective memories across Europe. The second panelist is Professor Beata Ociepka. She is a professor of international relations and international communications, and also the head of the public diplomacy lab at the Institute for International and Security Studies at the University of Warsaw. Welcome. Wrocław, I'm sorry. And Pierre-Frédéric, who is currently an associate professor at the University of Szczecin, and he is the deputy director of the Institute of History there. And his research covers the history of the 20th century international relations in Europe, post-war processes between Germany and its eastern neighbors after 1945, and emotions in international law. So as you can see, the research fields of our panelists cover a variety of issues, but this evening we are united together, and we will pull together to achieve the principal objective of this session. And the objective of this session is how we can use the post-colonial analysis in order to analyze, to discuss, to better understand international relations, and we're going to be focused on relations between free states, Ukraine, Poland, and Russia. Our three panelists also pull together and cooperate in a research project, and at the very beginning, may I ask Professor Beata Ociepka to introduce the project you work on, and later on, I kindly ask you to present your paper. We are waiting for the presentation. Professor, you have the floor.
Thank you for the invitation, and first of all, I would like to explain our presence here, because we are members of Horizon Europe project. You see here the title, United in Narrative Diversity, Cultural Exchange and Mutual Perceptions in Eastern Western Europe at the Threshold of a Digital Age. We are the part of this project. We are the working package 3, and our focus is on post-colonial narratives and post-colonial approaches. So we definitely work on narratives with the example of cultural diplomacy, but within the European Union. And this is also why we took this opportunity to come to Berlin, to Pilecki Institute, because our idea is that we should try to implement post-colonial approaches to analyze the relations between Eastern and Western members of the European Union. It is the field which actually in political science and international relations was somehow neglected. Whereas what we suggest is simply to observe that the European is defined differently in the West and in the East of Europe, and to analyze these different understandings, we focus on narratives and frames. We also analyze discourses of foreign policy, just to answer the questions which go back to the classic approaches of post-colonial studies. So we expect that we can observe some impact of post-colonial narratives in the West and in the East of Europe. We expect also that sides Orient and Occident ideas can be used in the case of the West and in the East of the EU. And we ask also the question, can the post-colonial approach be useful in the process of decoding the very term of European heritage and European values in the West and in the East? We are also interested in analyzing politics of memory, and this is also one of the reasons why this initiative by Pilecki Institute is also interesting for us. We are here to present also our research, but Pilecki is also one of the objects of our study, frankly speaking. So, well, actually, this proposal about this research started, in my case, okay, once again. I'm sorry.
Lucas, can you help?
Because there is an animation, but maybe I should, no, I should simply give up the animation, it doesn't matter much. Okay, anyway, well, the first idea to study the field was, in my case, born because of my early focus on Polish-German relations in my studies. And as many of you studied this field, you know that we have periodical tensions in Polish-German relations, and we have some also trouble to see the effectiveness of the means like cultural diplomacy to improve these relations. So, well, one of the hypotheses which may explain the reasons for these difficulties and turbulences in Polish-German relations is that we can understand better these turbulences while implementing post-colonial approaches. So I would expect that these approaches might be helpful in the analysis of Polish-German relations after '89. And what is even more, they can contribute also to more effectiveness of foreign policy analysis in this case. As at least partly our research is rooted in political science and international relations, we suggested here also foreign policy analysis as a method because it goes back to the political culture of the country. It means it allows to include also public opinion, media debates, and definitely all the public discourses into the analysis because they shape the decision process in foreign policy. Our understanding of post-colonial discourses and post-colonial as such is quite wide. We defined it as colonial and post-colonial discourses together. This is why we use the term post-colonial with post in brackets. It means that colonial and post-colonial go together. It is a kind of simplification which we consciously use. We also think that colonial and post-colonial discourses in Central and Eastern Europe, that they overlap. So these discourses, they shape the domestic debates and consequently influence foreign policy conduct. The problem, however, is that while analyzing Polish-German relations, we can find much context, actually, which was contributed by historians, people specializing in literature, philologists, sociologists, students of culture. I'm very thankful, by the way, to the colleagues who presented today also about reportage, for example, in the interwar period, because these presentations introduced you to the literary studies also, which are relevant also to understand better what does it mean, colonial discourse in Polish-German relations. However, even if these approaches are frequent on the Polish side, they have been not used by political scientists and people from international relations. So our idea is that it is time to change it because we expect that analyzing the narratives which are born during postcolonial discourses can help us also better understand the tensions which arise in Polish-German relations. So just to give you examples how it can work, it's the side idea that while studying relations between colonized and colonizers, any debates on the borders and borderlands are very relevant, and it's also our idea to include the eastern borderlanding into our analysis. It means the debates on the so-called kresowanie in Polish case, but also the debates which were initiated by German expellees. Of course, in both cases, these debates and these discourses had completely different relevance, and in Poland, they hardly had any political dimension, at least till '89, whereas after '89, the situation changed but this discourse, this Eastern borderlanding, never achieved such a political impact as the debates by German expellees in some periods in the after-war Western Germany politics. The beauty of this example is that the narratives by Polish, let's say, expellees, if I may use such a term, and the German expellees, they are very similar in the argumentation and even in the terminology used in these debates. And the second example which arises and which actually opens the field also for a kind of comparison of the debates, I mean the debates in Polish-German case and in the Polish-Ukrainian case, it's the fact that Poland plays here a double role as a colonized and a colonizer, and we can observe here how the debates which are visible on the Polish side in the Polish-German relations, how they are also used in Polish-Ukrainian relations. And one of the examples is the pupil-teacher metaphor, which has been used in Polish-German debates and which may be also visible in the Polish-Ukrainian case. So as you see, we are definitely focused on narratives, also because narratives shape foreign policy analysis. And I'm giving now the floor to my colleagues.
Thank you, Beata. Let me see whether I can manage. I can, yeah, that's great. Right, okay, so I'm representing here the focus on Polish-Ukrainian relations, and although the focus of Ukrainian anti-post-colonial discourses and practices are clearly focused on the Russian present and the Soviet past at the moment, what I try to quickly point out is that they're inherently entangled with Polish-Ukrainian issues and could likewise be analyzed from a post-colonial perspective. Okay, sorry, yeah. Between Poland and Ukraine, I'm touching about two aspects. One is institutional, that is the Polish National Institute of Memory being a close kind of a model for the Ukrainian National Institute of Remembrance, and conceptual transfers. My point is that post-colonial theory in Ukraine is also very much influenced by examples discussed in Poland. Let me start with the second point. It is an interesting story in itself, as for a long time after the collapse of the Soviet Union, post-colonial theory wasn't terribly important in the Ukrainian debates. I have to distinguish here, however, the Ukrainian diaspora in North America, which was very actively and early on using post-colonial theory and perceptions as a topic, whereas in Ukraine properly, it developed quite late, I would say during the 2000s, probably due to the fact that until then, and roughly speaking, until the Orange Revolution, the political orientation of the leadership was obviously not clearly oriented either towards the West or towards the East, the so-called multivectoral policies that were conducted under Kuchma. And the second issue that characterized the perception of post-colonial theory in Ukraine is that it was not very easily adopted to dominant other narratives, and here I mean particularly the question of modernization. The classical kind of take is that the metropolis is modernized and the periphery is trailing back. In the Ukrainian-Russian relations, that was not easily accepted by the Ukrainians, and the other thing is also the dominance of a national narrative and nation-building processes, again, sort of in the classical perception of post-colonial relations. It's not granted that the unit that is decolonizing is perceived as a nation. But as I said, then again in the 2000s with the Orange Revolution, that clearly changed. And I think one of the examples where it became most obvious for the whole world probably was the Ukrainian initiative to find international recognition for the fact of the Holodomor being a genocide in 2008, 2009. As I said, it's just around that time that the Ukrainians created the Ukrainian National Institute of Remembrance, with which, following the Polish model, combines tasks of research, education, propaganda, if you want, prosecution, illustration, and as an archive. So a very kind of powerful institution. When we look at the impact that all of that had on the Polish-Ukrainian relations, you could say it is kind of twofold, right? Sort of, it on the one hand created closer solidarity, and at the other time, or at the same time, also emphasized conflicting areas. An example of the former would be Ukraine's return to Europe, which, however, at the same time also reproduced post-colonial hierarchies. Ukraine, in kind of comparison to Russia, presents itself as much more Europeanized, and obviously since 2022, this discourse has taken on a lot in Ukraine there. But at the same time, with this kind of Europeanization, Poland sometimes acts not just as a mentor for a belatedly Europeanizing Ukraine, but even one could also say it acts as a gatekeeper, right? For example, the most kind of, I think, illustrating quote I could find is Jarosław Kaczynski warning Ukrainian President Piotr Poroshenko in 2016 that there is no way to Europe with Bandera, right? Sort of, at the same time, obviously, the Ukrainian turn against Soviet and Russian historical myths was the attempt to kind of find in Ukrainian history active national heroes fighting against the Soviet Union, and as it is well known, with their kind of search for national freedom fighters, they ended up with the positive re-evaluation of the notorious OUN and UPA, which has troubled, obviously, the bilateral relations with Poland since, where the Volhynian massacres became a politicum which hasn't disappeared since, and probably the peak of these conflicts were in 2018 with the well-known changes to the law on the Institute of Memory, which were perceived in Germany, interestingly, more as far as this law project prohibited the use of the collocation Polish concentration camps, which obviously is more kind of reflecting German and Polish relations, but it also criticized sanctioned the wrong interpretation of the Volhynian massacres.
Thank you very much. And now, Pierre-Frédéric.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so the aspect I want to enhance here in my short presentation, and which is also linked to my part of the work in our working package, is about Poland's position in the European framework, within the European Union especially, but looking at it from a historical perspective. As my colleague Christian, I'm a historian, but we are working quite interdisciplinary together, also with Beata as a political scientist, and well, it's something that among historians is not always very popular. I like it, in fact, to enrich historical or historiographical research through sometimes analytical tools that have been produced by other humanities or social sciences. In that case, there are interesting tools from the political sciences that are not so new, that have been developed especially in the constructivist approach of international relations by the late 90s, especially by Marta Finnemore and Catherine Sicking, about normativity, norm creating, and norm entrepreneurs in international relations. And what we observe for Poland through the last 30 years is that Poland's status within the European Union and its role identity, so how Poland sees itself and how other partners, especially in the western part of Europe, look at Poland and at Poland as an agent in international relations within the European Union, has changed from a status that we could call a status of an underdog, because as most countries in Central Eastern Europe, the label used to create a sort of collective identity for the countries that had liberated themselves from communism was post-communism. Post-communism is a typical underdog label. It's not an identity. You are post something. Post-communism itself is showing a certain step of decolonization, because you are post-communist, you become a sort of post-imperial area in Europe. Yeah? After the withdrawal of the former imperialist power, the hegemon, the USSR, Soviet Union, obviously. And from this status of an underdog in a sort of post-imperial space, a post-imperial space is seen basically as something empty, as a void that has to be filled with norms, with a certain framework, and this transfer from west to east was seen as something quite natural from the Western perspective, but also, to be honest, by most of the democratic new elites in Poland and in other countries in the area, with this return to Europe discourse that you mentioned, and that was as popular in the East that it was in the West, and has been started being criticized from the Central Eastern perspective later, but not at the very beginning in this euphoria of post-89. Well, little by little, through several steps, and especially since the 2000s and since Poland entered the club of European Union members as a full right member state, this discourse has transformed, and also the perception and self-perception of Poland as an actor, as an agent in EU international relations has changed, and Poland has become more and more a state considering itself first, and then later being considered by others, especially the historical leading states of the European Union, former EEC, so France and Germany especially, as a junior partner. And even this junior partner position has been, leveled up step by step. And here, of course, important markers, we have just 3 examples here that have been given. Where Georgia 2008, just to remind you, it was when a late Polish president Lech Kaczynski had this, from today's perspective, we could say sort of far-seeing, far-sighted premonition about Russia's plans, so that today it's Georgia that was invaded, and later maybe it can be Ukraine or the Baltic states, and maybe one time our country, Poland, yeah? Which was considered in 2008 still by many experts and especially political decision makers in Berlin, Paris, and other Western European capital cities as depreciated as a typical Central European Russia-phobic atavism, yeah, not to be taken seriously because, in fact, Putin is a guy you can work with. For sure, we will make it. Yeah. Later, of course, there was this Maidan, 2013, 2014. Again, Polish decision makers had the plan of gaining more influence. The Weimar Triangle, this trilateral format, France, Germany, Poland, was a bit more vivid than it used to be in the past years after this crisis of the beginning of the 2000s. And you had these 3 ministers of foreign affairs meeting in the middle of the Maidan turmoil in Kiev and trying to find a solution with the Ukrainian government. That was a step, but the highest level of transformation of Poland's status and of the perception of Poland's status, and not only Poland, but also the Baltic states and several other agents in the state system within the European Union, was of course 2022. So, I mean, the start of the full-scale invasion by Russia against Ukraine, not the beginning of the war as it was depicted sometimes in Western European media, because the war had lasted much longer, but the beginning of the full-scale invasion, yeah? And in fact, here we have, I mentioned this political scientist, Finemore and Sikking, we have Poland becoming a norm entrepreneur, someone who is a norm setter, or at least who has the opportunity to become a norm setter, to be accepted as one of those who define or redefine a norm. Which norm? Basically the norm of EU's neighboring policy towards the East, especially towards Russia. And you have this German Zeitenwende, which was a big announcement, of course, which was followed by deeds, but not all of a sudden, but still, even the fact that the German Chancellor mentions this so obviously was a strong fact. It was not mentioned like that by France, but France also went through this very strong transformation, we could say, from Saulus to Paulus, yeah? And after, well, a bit erratic behaviors at the beginning throughout spring 2002. But still, what we observe, it's difficult for now to say whether it's just a moment or if it's possible to have it lasting and leading to a deep transformation, a structural transformation of the way the EU perceives the future of its relation with Russia. But still, to come to an end, these aspects, this sort of empowerment of Central Eastern European actors is quite strongly exemplified by the Polish case, maybe also because Poland is the strongest actor in the macro region.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this 3 introductions into the project. Before we yield the floor to the audience, and you will have an opportunity to ask questions, well, as a moderator, I have this privilege and pleasure to initiate the discussion. And listening to your introductions, I kept watching at the title of this panel. So, decolonial as a factor influencing foreign policy. You know, I used to think that foreign policy can be influenced by the economic factors, by security factors, by the history. But what about the colonial agent, the colonial factor? How do you understand the colonial as something tangible that can influence foreign relations? And, well, you are a team, so who of you would like to answer this question?
The first answer from the from the angle of political science, international relations, is the intermestic dimension of foreign policy. It means the impact of domestic debates, the most relevant narratives on the decision-taking process in foreign policy. And this is what I also suggested in my introduction. The problem is cultural policy in the country. What are the main topics? What is the agenda of the politicians, of the media, and of the people? And how these topics shape also foreign policy. So one example, once again, from Polish-German relations, suddenly in 2005 and 2007, German media discovered Poland anew. So Poland suddenly turned to a hot topic between 2005 and 2007. Because at the time it was the first, let's say, term of Law and Justice Party when it governed Poland. And the way they communicated Polish objectives and also the new understanding of Polish-German relations, but also some decisions in internal policy were an extreme surprise for German media and German audience. And at that time, the German correspondents in Poland had paradoxically very good time because they produced much of material just to make the people in Germany better understand Poland. And this is the situation of strongly polarized countries. Peace already at that time spoke colonial language, and it hasn't stopped since then, because this party addresses Germany very often as a colonial dominant country which tries to subordinate Poland, not tries, according to Peace. Germany has been dominating Poland politically, economically, culturally, in media, for example, and so on and so on. So this is how it influences also foreign policy decisions, because the people who are responsible for foreign policy, who take the decisions, they socialized in a system in line with the main ideas also in cultural policy. They have been reading this interwar reportage, which you heard about in the afternoon session, and they were also shaped by the books by Sienkiewicz. I also belong to this generation, and we know that my generation opinion about Polish-Ukrainian relations is much shaped by Sienkiewicz, unfortunately, with many unexpected, sometimes, consequences. So this is actually how it works. We can discover these colonial narratives in the society, in the socialization process, in the textbooks. We are going to talk about it tomorrow or on Friday. And then the politicians who present the colonial narratives They are not from the moon, but they underwent the process of socialization simply in the institutions in the country.
Christian, do you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I mean, we have heard the whole afternoon how it works if a country is not aware of using colonial concepts, colonial language, and so on and so forth. And it's a very slow process that Germans are awaking to the fact that it is there. But it's I mean, think of what we heard about the perception of that in Central Eastern Europe, the Baltics, and so on and so forth, right? And yeah, sort of, you already mentioned it, Pierre, so we can have still severe doubts as to whether the Zeitenwende has already started also a rethinking of that.
Because, of course, the panel is more about Germany, Poland, Ukraine, but as a Frenchman, I'm prone to mention our neighbor because we have at least one wall in common here with the French embassy. So if we take a defense, if about colonial, post-colonial, we take a stiff definition of it or a more soft one. If we take a softer one and replace post-colonial attitude in foreign policy or in foreign policy discourse as in a larger way something that is sort of desubjectivating the other, the partner, denying the other one the agency, the right to co-decide at least, then we can follow much farther back since 89 this kind of discourse. One of the strongest stances in this respect, for sure, at least it's how I see it, was 2001, late French President Jacques Chirac, something that the French have forgotten since a long time, but that is still very well remembered in Poland, not only in Poland, when 8 countries, so basically all the future almost EU members, new EU members, besides Cyprus and Malta, so all the Central Eastern European bloc, let's say, that would enter 3 years later the EU, wrote a letter of support to the United States as far as the Iraq crisis was concerned. And while Germans and French were surprised, and the French, at least French president, was more than surprised. He even lost his diplomatic abilities and just said that the Poles and the others had lost a good opportunity to shut up. Yeah? He didn't say it shut up, but to remain quiet. But I think knowing the personality a bit of this politician, he had this in mind. So this is very colonial. This is very not even post-colonial. It's a strong. It's one of the strongest othering stances in post-89 political discourse, trans-European relations, I would say. Even if you always remind about French-Polish friendship and so on, okay, but still, it was a French president who said that. So.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I would like to refer to what Professor Ociepka has said about relations between Poland and Germany. So let another state to this situation, Namibia. You know, as you know, there is a tense dispute between Poland and Germany about reparations, right? Poland wants to get reparations from Germany, and also Namibia, as a post-colonial state, as a former German Southwest Africa, sought compensations from Germany in the wake of the Nama-Herero War and genocide at the beginning of the 20th century. And this leads me to the next question. When you observe this couple of relationships, Germany-Poland, Germany-Namibia, they are both in colonial historical context. Do you think that these relationships are symmetrical, asymmetrical? Can you see any differences or similarities between these two?
I will start answering and then I will give the micro to my colleagues. Actually, in Polish-German case, and especially in German case, there is a huge difference between the overseas colonialism and the so-called internal or continental colonialism, whereas Germany takes the responsibility for the overseas colonialism. In the case of the, let's say, inter-European or internal continental colonialism, this problem has been hardly realized, seen. It's symbolical that in last years, during the German Bundestag discussions about German colonialism, the Bundestag actually celebrated the end of German colonialism because it symbolically was finished in 1918. In Polish interpretation, it is absolutely false, because we can also interpret the Second World War as the case of German colonialism. And of course, some would say that we can observe some similar developments after '89, but it depends once again on the political stance of the politicians in Poland, but also some academics, by the way. So the difference is huge. The problem maybe can be seen similar, but it goes back to something that Kratochwil described when during the early discussions of the European neighborhood policy. And he observed about, I think, 27, 28, that whereas the Western countries understood their relations with the South as friends in the South, then they rather understand themselves as teachers in the East. And we have also the consequences of such an attitude in the cases like reparations. We could go even further to the relations, German-Israeli relations, because it was the context also of the last debate already under the government of Tusk in Poland about this not very successful visit of Chancellor Scholz in Poland, and the idea was that he would suggest some recompensations, firstly for the victims of Holocaust in Poland. It looks so that there is also a huge difference between Jews with Polish citizenship and with Israeli citizenship, because the compensations for what they suffered during the Second World War are different depending on if they are Polish or Israeli citizens. And I think it is also the context of this acceptance of overseas colonialism and simply overlooking the Eastern colonialism. So it's simply silence, it's not seen, it has not been realized yet.
Yeah, so in other words, definition matters. We used to accept that colonialism is the overseas domination, right, with settlers sent there, while Eastern Europe was, you know, just by the side. So perhaps definition and narrative also matters. Thank you very much. Christian, can you follow this?
I again would just point to the discussions of this afternoon, right? So when my colleague Franziska here in her keynote mentioned that the Russians are blind to the kind of fact that their relationship to the peripheries was colonial, although it was not racially defined. Although that's also an oversight. I mean, sort of Russians tend to forget, for example, that their legislation introduced as early as 1819 a racial category into their actually estate system, right? Sort of before that, conquered territories, the people were kind of assorted to the Russian estate system. You were either a noble or a peasant. With the Asian conquests of the 19th century, you became an alien in Rodiec, right? Sort of, there is a racial dimension in that, clearly. But I mean, sort of the same kind of, that's why perhaps the Russians and Germans are so happy friends, or would like to be, because they both overlook the same things, right? In that sense, right? That it is a gradual kind of othering based on linguistic, cultural, and other features that makes the difference, and that seems to be really very sort of hard to come by.
Yeah, maybe just in fact that this kind of dichotomies between teacher and pupil or in this aspect. It's something that, of course, you can find other examples of, not specifically or only in West-East, but also, let's say, within the European Union, between North-South, or between the serious economies and these southern economies like Greece and so on. And we had this during the economic crisis in Greece. But the difference still, according to me at least, is that what makes it more a subject of conflict or contestation is that actors in the, let's say, the east of the continent, or aspiring co-leaders, which was not something that Greece would like to apply for when it was in a state of crisis, even today or before. So the asymmetry was much stronger, in fact, between a rich north of the EU and a south crippled with debts and so on. And this aspiration to co-leadership within the European Union is the element, I think, that makes it appear to the West all of a sudden as a form of competition or let's say of questioning the leadership as it used to be so far and as it worked, or at least in the West, at least they were happy with. Yeah.
Pierre-Frédéric, thank you very much for this. And let me briefly comment. You have mentioned Greece. And this brought me to, well, a brief interviews I conducted in Greece recently. Just not interviews, just friendly talks with my Greek friends of different sorts, intellectuals and, workers. And what was shocking was that they praised President Putin for challenging the West. They presented Putin as an anti-West hero. So perhaps this indicates that this post-colonial thinking is really present at the grassroots level. So we have to think about that. And the last question before giving the floor to the audience, the question which is truly, truly important to me, question about methodology. Because one may ask, what does it mean that we apply post-colonial approach to international relations, international law, etc.? Because we tend to think that only language, only phraseology matters. We talk about domination, hegemony, structures of power. Well, so what are the limits of this post-colonial approach when you apply this approach to international relations? Can you admit that there are limits and perhaps quite visible limits?
There are limits, of course. For example, regional, as I said. In some cases, people from political science, international relations, but also historians in Poland would definitely reject the post-colonial approach, especially in Polish-Ukrainian relations, or generally in relations of Poland with Eastern neighbors, because they also understand colonialism firstly as overseas type of colonialism. So there are some, I would say, geopolitical reasons why people also reject this approach. We are much rooted, by the way, in analyzing narratives. So we are mainly interested in narratives on foreign policy. And this is also one of the typical approaches in post-colonial studies. And this is also often rejected, especially by the realist school in international relations. Then, as you know, post-colonial approaches are often, not often, they are simply rooted in Marxist school. And as you can imagine, in Poland, it contributes to not much popularity of post-colonial approaches, especially in political science and international relations. Then the next limitation would be that many authors of post-colonial, especially school, they do feminist research, which is actually rooted in feminist approaches. And once again, it would be a limitation in the Polish case. So you would not be seen very seriously in Polish international relations if you implement these feminist approaches. It's not the mainstream, I would say. Generally, post-colonial approaches in some academias in Europe are not very popular, and there are some limitations which result, maybe this is the temporary also dimension, because it comes with time, the realization that we can implement post-colonial approaches to analyze your cases. I probably committed a faux pas last time while asking our Romanian friends if they think or could contribute also to our work while thinking of the Hungarian-Romanian relations. And they actually rejected my proposal, and then I was explained by some colleagues, but not Romanian colleagues, that probably it is not the right time to touch upon this dimension of Hungarian-Romanian relations. So the time has to come simply, and this is the limitation also.
Yeah, so limitations of political and sociological nature. Before I yield the floor to Christian, you have mentioned the feminist approach to international relations as perceived not à la mode in Polish scholarly fields. Let me only mention that one of the most prominent feminist scholar of international law, Hilary Charlesworth, she became a judge of the International Court of Justice recently. So the feminism reached, you know, not the highest, but most authoritative international judicial body. Christian, please.
You asked about methodological problems and limitations, and I'm tempted to quote. Probably my French is very bad, and Pierre is now kind of shouting at me. But I'm always thinking of this kind of warning sign that you have at French level crossings. Un train peut en cacher un autre, and that's, I think, the strongest limitation, because a lot of post-colonial scholarship is organized in terms of binary kind of relationships, right? You have the colonized and the colonized. And as we try to show with the example of Poland, which is both a colonized and a colonized, then you get into troubles, right? Sort of then you need to do several kind of post-colonial studies and combine them. And I think that's indeed also problematic, because take the focus of Ukraine's decommunization policies nowadays is clearly directed against Russia, but it has all these kind of side effects, collateral effects that then are getting out of sight if you just focus on the kind of Ukrainian-Russian or be it Ukrainian-Polish relations. I think here is a problem that needs to be addressed when you use post-colonial approaches.
About the limits or the risks, I would just like to add the fact that, as Beata mentioned it, in political science or social science and researches about EU, this post-colonial stance has not been so popular. It's starting slowly. But the risk is that, given the fact that parallelly to that, it's more and more popular in media, in political discourse, especially since 2022 in Russia's full-scale aggression against Ukraine, we, perhaps not us exactly so far, but researchers who are applying this kind of framework can have the difficulty to prove that they actually do research. They are not just surfing on the mainstream of media and so on, but they're really seriously working on this. So this can be a limitation, or this can put an additional, let's say, constraint on us to double check, or at least to over justify a bit our research, because it starts being more and more popular in the non-scientific world. Just an example, lately there was a talk show where you had the rising star of German politics, Sarah Wagenknecht, and a Bulgarian expert accused her of thinking as a colonialist, yeah, because of her representation of how we could end the war in Ukraine, yeah. So it's more and more present, and the word is present, and the label, and when it becomes a label, then it's the enemy of science. You know, you feel like, can I use it, or should I create another analytic concept? Yeah.
That's the problem. How the expertise percolates and gets to the popular public level. Well, thank you very much, and now we open the floor for your questions. My suggestion is that let's gather 2 or 3 questions, and please, yeah.
My first question is between decolonization and corruption, any research possible? Because on the first conference in St. Petersburg, when we changed there was a conference about corruption. I have never heard a study about corruption. Corruption is a very long history, and what it means, I discovered, for instance, in the GDR files, for nomenclatura people, they had the special money available aside of the big companies, and there's no, yeah, schwarze Kasse, also. Das ist ein Riesenthema, das die Ökonomen gar nicht begreifen, dass diese Länder über Korruption gesteuert wurden. So, woher kommen denn die ganzen Oligarchen und dieses ganze Zeug? Der zweite ist nur eine Bemerkung. In Preußen gab es ein Gesetz über innere Kolonisierung. Wenn man eine Fabrik baute oder Mining, also irgendwas, da musste man für die Kirche, für die Schule und so weiter, musste diese Firma gleich das mitbauen. Deswegen sehen im Ruhrgebiet die Dörfer alle so ähnlich aus, weil sie also nach so einem bestimmten Standard auch gebaut sind. Ja. Also da gibt es auch eine innere Interpretation von Kolonisierung, die sich bis in unser Grundgesetz gehalten hat, dass nämlich die Länder sozusagen dafür sorgen müssen, dass sie einigermaßen gleiche Lebensumstände haben. Also das ist auch ein Aspekt, der völlig vergessen wird in der heutigen Diskussion, dass der Staat dafür sorgt. Und die Preußen haben unglaublich genaue Analysen, zum Beispiel der Steuerlast in den einzelnen Kreisen gemacht. Das heißt, sie haben einen Überblick über die Steuerleistung der Leute gemacht und darauf auch ihre Mittel reingesetzt. Dass also da man kriegte ja nur einen Zuschuss, ja, aber der Zuschuss wurde zum Beispiel nach solchen Kategorien organisiert. Das sind alles völlig vergessene Dinge, die heute gar keine Rolle mehr spielen, obwohl die Staaten genau dasselbe machen. Nämlich, wer wann irgendwann einen Zuschuss kriegt zu seiner Aktivität, das wissen wir doch gar nicht. Wir untersuchen doch keine Haushalte, wo das dann unten als Fußnote drin steht und dergleichen mehr.
Excuse me. So, we have no translation today. Please let's stay in English, and we are collecting questions and not too long statements. Just to stay in time, because we are over the time already. Excuse me. Thank you.
The second question?
Okay, so short questions, but few of them. So first one is to Pierre-Frédéric. Yeah? I'm sorry. So my question is like, why? I'm not saying that I disagree with you that the Georgia 2008 was this changing moment, because in this speech which you mentioned, I think like after this sentence, before this sentence, the sentence before was very important because there is the subjectivity for the first time appearing. But one can ask, why not the Orange Revolution? So that's my question. Why this is not the moment which we can mention as a moment when actually this idea of the different subjectivity of the Central Europe is changing? So that's the first one. And I want to come back to the methods, because you said like narratives in foreign policy affairs. I don't know at what stage your research is, and I don't know how much you can share, but I want to ask you how you do that. Actually, how you are gathering these narratives, what's the methods which you're using to do that. And last thing, more of a comment than like the question. You said that there is post-colonial studies are missing from the political science and from the international relations. I would agree with you, and my idea is actually that it comes from the fact, not even the Marxist background of the postcolonial theories, but the fact that it's critical. So in political science and international relations, there is not especially a lot of space for the critical theory. So maybe when we are talking about the decolonization, we should start thinking about the decolonizing the political science itself, because especially in Poland, because we are just repeating what came from the West to Poland, and we are not even taking into consideration how important is it. Last sentence, okay? And this is also regarding something which left very often brings as a critics towards using postcolonial theory in Central and Eastern Europe. Because it's not even about the overseas and the fact that this is overseas theory, but the fact that actually it's lacking this economic component, which was very important for colonization itself. So, for example, the critics of critics from the left very often are talking about the fiscal hegemony of Germany and this idea of pushing the Southern Europe in 2008, 2009. So how you are approaching that economic component of it? I've got many more, but we can talk about it later.
Thank you very much. Last question in this round, but please do not be worried. After the feedback from the bench, we will have an opportunity for the second round, please.
Talking about limits and risks of the post-colonial discourse implemented to social sciences. European Union itself is quite often described and depicted as a colonial project, mostly by right-wing populists, but not only. How then post-colonial discourse could be used in benefit of the European Union as a platform, unifying platform for Eastern European countries?
We have a bunch of questions.
Yeah, perhaps I start with the question and the comments of the first person. Sort of, I can assure. Okay, I'm not quite sure that he's listening to what I'm saying. Okay, so perhaps then we start with the other questions.
Well, may I start with the last one, maybe, and then go over to your question. I think that most of it, because it's a political discourse. Yeah, you mentioned right-wing populists, but well, looking at Greece, I think left-wing populists had a similar discourse about the EU during the crisis. I think it's. I don't know whether they chose colonial as their catchword because it sounds better, but I think what they see as a danger, or what they depict as a danger as part of their political business to reach for the electorate, is more the idea that the EU would be a project that limits sovereignty, so that would be a sort of imperial project. But I'm not sure whether there is a stronger or deeper reflection about why to use the word colonial instead of imperial. I'm not sure, but I would just like to mention it because, as for me, it's not that clear. I haven't studied. I'm not a specialist in populist discourses throughout Europe in the past, let's say, at least 20 years. But I think that what many politicians that are linked to this type of doing political business are doing when using colonial is just using another word for imperial or limiting sovereignty. As for your question concerning the Orange Revolution, well, maybe it was not that present in the discourse also because back in 2004, 2005, there was not so much or so strong an aspiration of Central European newly EU members to reach for co-leadership, maybe, but or at least also the Western European Russian economic links that were still building up and becoming stronger, but were not that strong as they were just before the outbreak of the full-scale invasion, they were still not contested. They were not seen as a model that has to be criticized, at least from the norm setters in the western part of Europe. At least it's how I see it. And as far as Ukraine was concerned, I don't know about the United States back then, but at least in Western European decision centers, let's say, so far there was not a plan for Ukraine, I would say, or something like we should integrate Ukraine or we should help Ukraine to get closer to us.
No, and sort of perhaps. Well, I perhaps just to see that we're not all thinking along the same line, I think I agree with you, because it was indeed the two presidents going to Kiev, right? And then actually pressurizing the Germans and the French to follow up. So I think there's a strong argument. You can say the Orange Revolution was a game changer, and I think it is even more so when you think about the Russian kind of perception of it and the dynamics that unleashed, right? So there is a good reason to say you can start with the Orange Revolution. So I have a bit of a different perspective on it, I guess, right?
Maybe it depends on whose perspective you take. If it's a Russian one, for sure, yeah. But from the Western perspective, Western European perspective, I'm not that positive.
We have a dispute here.
Okay, so maybe I will go back to the first question about decolonization, the colonial approaches and corruption. And of course, there is a link because especially, once again, when we analyze the debates, I would call them post-colonial debates, when we observe that the post-colonial countries, we have internal controversy about being still dependent on the colonizer. And this colonizer is supposed to corrupt at least the part of the people of the colonized who are still dependent and are seen as foreign agents. And of course, we all know how the term foreign agent works in Europe, in many European countries, also in Russia. We have it also in Poland as let's say, people who, for example, had scholarships from Germany. They are also seen as this corrupted by German government. I have a citation which I like a lot from Law and Justice political programs, election programs, which explains this attitude, and it says it gives you actually the definition of a post-colonial. Understood as subordination that takes many forms. It's the citation, the most visible, almost ostentatious one, being questioning values of Polishness and contrasting it with Europeanness. This attitude is often combined with a completely uncritical readiness, self-interested or selfless, to accept external demands relating to Polish affairs. This kind of attitude is found not only among the elite, scientists and publicists call it postcolonialism because of the analogy to the views and behavior of the leadership layers in colonies that gained independence, but were still subordinated to the metropolis and treated their own citizens with aversion. Regardless of the scientific correctness of the concept of postcolonialism, the resignation of a significant part of the elite from loyalty to the Polish state is undoubtedly a serious feature of the system created after 1989, and it was the part of the political program in 2019, not repeated in the last elections 2023, and behind it there is the idea these elites, these scientists, these publicists, they are paid corrupted by, let's say, Western hegemons. So this is the one thing which leads also to the economic context of post-colonial research, and it's extremely important, of course, and we also included it into our work with, as for now, with most visible example of Nord Stream. We simply use Nord Stream as an example. Also because we have this use of very nice narrative used in the debate on Nord Stream, as Tusk responded to Western partners that they lost the opportunity to keep quiet while going back to Nordic this summer. So it backfires, these colonial narratives backfire, but of course the economic context is here very relevant because we have very similar approaches by the path dependence school to, let's say, overseas colonies and Eastern Europe. And in this case, we have the voices from Central and Eastern European economists, but also journalists who specialize in this field, who present very colonial analysis of the unwanted impact of dominating Western economies in Central and Eastern Europe. I did research also on the very sensitive media market, because you know that we used to have a huge investments of German media in Poland, and this was also very much debated because of this sensitive cultural context of investments in media. And here we had very direct evidence of clearly colonial discourse about the impact of media moguls, German media moguls in Poland. And we have here a very interesting case in which we have a kind of cultural imperialism actual debate in Poland, but it is not aimed at the US as is the global trend, but it's actually aimed at Germany and an unwanted cultural impact on Germany, on Poland, by the way, especially on young Polish women and female teenagers. It was very visible in the debate in the 90s. And this is how we come to the idea of a methodology about the narratives, where we actually search for these post-colonial narratives, post-colonial analysis, how we do it as far as foreign policy is concerned. So we consciously concentrate on the debates of foreign policy. So we analyze speeches, main documents, strategies in foreign policy, but we also analyze narratives. We search for them in these speeches, but also in media debates. We would like also to analyze the debates of the users of social media, but it's difficult, of course, as you can imagine. And then what we do is also we included cultural diplomacy into our analysis, because your question, how can actually this approach, post-colonial approach, how it can contribute to more unity maybe in the European Union. So one of the answers is, and it is also one of our objectives, we would like simply to show that it's relevant to be conscious that we use these colonial and post-colonial narratives also within the European Union when we speak with each other, I mean the Western and Eastern countries. And then perhaps cultural diplomacy can be helpful in creating such a platform for better understanding and also for not eliminating, but understanding our colonial context which we use when we speak with each other. And here comes this example why actually cultural diplomacy has been working perfectly, on maybe not so perfectly, Pierre can of course discuss it, in German-French relations, and why it has brought much less, let's say, positive effects in Polish-German relations. Of course, one of the answers is geopolitics, is asymmetry in the relations between Poland and Germany, and not equal potentials, whereas in the French-German context, these post-colonial narratives are practically missing because the potentials are simply more equal. In Polish-German case, the potentials are not equal, and we have here the relations of the colonized with the colonizer. And here's this next hypothesis that we can use also the cases from cultural diplomacy to understand better why sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, and we can also use it for the methodological purposes, just to observe if, in this case, postcolonial approaches might be useful. Our next project, by the way, perhaps will be focused on decolonizing academia. So it also came to our mind, I think, people who still are in academia from Central and Eastern Europe would have some, I think we all have some cases and examples of some colonial relations and very nice colonial narratives. So the longer we work, the collection is, of course, bigger. Thank you.
Yeah. As for the last words, if we happen to find a grant for this project, it would be a miracle. But about decolonizing academia. But let's try. Just in addition, as for other sources, of course, we reach back more to 2004, but looking also for deeper roots of it, more historiographically, one of the elements of interest is also some archival research at the turn of the late 80s, beginning of the 19th century. You know, in archives mainly have this 30 years limit to have access to documents, and try to find in the exchange between ministries, embassies, and so on, whether you have this, these elements of narrative, of discourse that appear when commenting about events or when negotiating with, let's say, between Germans and Poles or French and Poles. This neo-colonial, post-colonial, how to call it, aspects. But this was just to add this element of archive research too, which is a bit more difficult because you're searching and searching, and sometimes you find something. It's not that systematical as you know, media analysis, for example.
Yeah. I would add only two things. First of all, I'm deeply convinced that the academia will decolonize itself if only it pays off. And secondly, you have mentioned this cultural diplomacy and other stuff, and I think whether could we interpret the fact of being post-colonial state as bringing special symbolic capital within the field theory of Pierre Bourdieu? That would be interesting, perhaps, being post-colonial as a symbolic capital. Well, I promised to the audience that there would be in the second round. We have 10 minutes, okay, 10 minutes. So please be brief. Please go straight to your questions.
Hello. Thank you so much for a very stimulating debate. I would like to turn back to what you said, actually the question from Dr. Wasiński. In the beginning, if I understood correctly, you mentioned that the usage of this post-colonial lens and the ongoing debates about current affairs is sometimes unhelpful or invalid. And for me, not coming from the academic background, but rather from the media and, you know, in the space of news and commentary, this is super interesting. To what extent, actually, using this narrative, calling certain things as colonial. For instance, one example I would like to use, and I would like to hear your thoughts on this matter. Very recent is the Quad talks, the four-country format that took place in Berlin just a few days ago, which was resonated hugely in Poland, was very much criticized. But I haven't seen any mentions or commentaries that would posit this as a sort of a colonial sort of framework or imperial, if you may. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this and whether this would apply in this case, and would it be helpful?
Well, okay. And the last question? Is there any? Okay.
Thank you very much for the discussion. And I've got one question regarding when we talked about the research on a new role of Poland as a regional leader. I didn't really understand, like, I've got the introduction, I've got the direction of reasoning this issue, but I didn't get, like, the conclusion of this research, why exactly do you think that like which signs serve as a proof that specifically Poland, as an emerging regional leader, influenced the approach of the European Union to think about like threats like Russia, rethinking about the Eastern European Partnership and other things like that? I mean, how can you prove that specifically Poland's new role influenced that, but not the geopolitical landscape shifts and different threats that appear like recently? Because from what I research and from what I see, the European Union countries, specifically their leaders, like if we talk about Germany or about France, they changed the perspective on Ukraine, specifically when they saw the threat in the face of Russia to themselves and that this threat is real. So how exactly do you prove that? Like, what are the signs that specifically Poland is a new regional leader and that it influences the approach of the European Union? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and please answer the questions.
So as far as you mentioned this, yeah, you came to speak about Pierre Bourdieu. So I would say, and it's linked to also your question, maybe if you relate to what I said, I was not precise enough because of lack of time, but it's still a work in progress as far as we see it, or I see it, but I think we see it. I mentioned it by the end. It's open-ended. It's something that is going on, especially as a historian. I would be... I would not be prone to take to make too quick conclusions about how historically it would be set if we go back to it, looking at it in the next 20, 30 or 50 years, for example. But it's a trend. But I said that we have no official evidence, not real, not strong evidence whether it will last or it's just a moment. Some commentators spoke about Central Eastern European or a Polish moment, yeah, that is about using it properly or not, depending on how you behave on the political scene. That's the first point. And to get back to Bourdieu, well, he has this nice wording about the position in society of academicians, of intellectualists, that they're a bit like the dominated among the dominators, or the dominators among the dominated. And well, right now, Poland's position in the big game is a bit about this. Will Poland be a dominated among the dominators, among the leaders, but still the weaker one? Or will it be more comfortable for Poland to be the dominating among the dominated? Well, I have no answer to this so far. Or both, a bit depending on the situation. Yeah. So this is a reflection I have because you brought us on Bourdieu.
Okay. So I think that's it. So I hope we answered your questions. If not, I think I seem to remember this is not the last point in the program, right?
No, there's
drinks, so we can discuss the remaining the questions perhaps over a glass. Thank you.
Yeah, so finally, let me thank you, our panelists, for a wonderful discussion, and also many thanks to the audience for your interest, for your concentration on what has happened, and for your questions. Thank you very much.